Benazir Bhutto begins her speech with a critique of the mullahs. What is her critique? How does she define Islam differently than them? What are some issues in the Quran which are used to explain the inferiority and subjugation of women? How does Benazir Bhutto respond to these claims? Who are some Muslims Benazir Bhutto offers as examples of independent women in the early Ummah? Half the world is missing data. This saying is a bit of a sour joke about reading history through the lens of gender. In one sense, it suggests that the people who write histories, both now and in the past, are overwhelmingly men, and that causes them to overlook the lives and experiences of half the human race, women and girls. In another sense, the line suggests that women actually are missing from the record, especially in the pre-modern world. Finding evidence of the lives, thoughts, and contributions of pre-modern women is always particularly difficult because the data of these people has been obscured into oblivion. Now, on the global and trans-historical scale, if we can make such a large claim, the tracking of women in Islamic history is slightly better than most other pre-modern civilizations. This could be due to some unique factors of Islam, so for instance the precedent of the Quran, which discusses the role of women quite a bit. It could also be more incidental, as Muslims on the whole were more literate than most other pre-modern people. Therefore, the records of the lives and thoughts of women are more likely to survive to us. But whatever the case, there is little that can be said about Muslim women or the relationship of Islam to women and girls everywhere, for the same reason that there's little to be said about Muslim men everywhere. Islam is just too big, too diverse, and too old to make any simple claims. The legal rights of women vary widely from place to place, as do their functions in society. Muslim women have a variety of different opinions, theologies, practices, customs, and languages, just as the men do. We can say that perhaps women are more likely to be authoritative in, for instance, the sciences of hadith, where one's memory is the deciding factor of authority. Or that women are more likely to be found practicing Sufism, as mysticism by its very nature is about personal experience and not political or social status. There are Muslim women who believe it is their role to be subservient to men, and there are Muslim feminists. And there are those who believe in the liberation of women and girls, but reject the label of feminism as a colonial intrusion. There are Muslim women who expose their hair in public, and others who cover some of their hair, cover all of it, or cover their faces and hands as well. This practice, collectively referred to as hijab, the veil or the cover, varies dramatically in the rationale, style, and practice of when these covers are or are not used. For just some of many thousands of examples, in Indonesia, some women wear the selendang, a light, sheer piece of cloth that sits on top of the head and leaves the hair covered, but still visible. Across Central Asia and China, many women just wear taqiyya, a skull cap that merely sits on one's hair well above the hairline. And in these places, including in much of the Arab world too, men wear taqiyya as well. In areas with more Wahhabi Muslims, you can see the niqab, a facial veil, which is part of the traditional clothing of the Najd region of Arabia. Since Wahhabis usually argue that the norms of the Najd are preferable, the use of the niqab often, but not always, appears where Wahhabis do too. Muslim women in the subcontinent sometimes wear a double head and body wrap called a dupada, just as Hindu and Sikh women in the subcontinent do. Rural women in the Sunni parts of the Gulf region, especially older women, are sometimes known to don the patulla, which is a cloth and metal face mask that really only covers the nose. Shiite women, especially in Iran and the Persianate world, often wear the chador, which is basically just an outer cloak that's pulled up over the head when one goes outside. And related to that, when some Afghani and Pakistani women go out in public, they use the shadari, or burqa, which covers the face and the hands entirely, but is sheer enough to be seen through. All of these, and many, many more varieties, are all called hijab, veiling or covering. And there are boundless reasons a Muslim woman may wear one, just as there are boundless reasons why a Muslim woman may not wear one. See how complicated it can get trying to discuss what Muslim women are like, or do, or think? And this is just over a piece of fabric. And so it seems that it's best to turn over this discussion to Muslim women themselves. Since we're now firmly in the modern period, and our subjects can speak directly to us, we're just going to listen to the words of two Muslim women over this discussion and the next. We'll meet two Muslim women, one from Pakistan and one from the United States, who will address their concerns and opinions about the state and role of women in Islam for themselves. After a short introduction to each of these women, I'll just read to you what they have to say verbatim, and as necessary, I'm going to provide you some notes on what they have to say. The first Muslim woman we're going to speak to is Benazir Bhutto, the first woman to lead a Muslim elective government in history, the government of Pakistan. Actually, she was prime minister twice, from 1988 to 1990, and then again from 1993 to 1996. Part Kurdish and part Sindhi, Bhutto was one of a line of powerful politicians from Karachi. Bhutto's father, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, had previously been the prime minister as well until his murder in 1977. After her father's death, Bhutto came to the helm of the political party he had founded, the Pakistan People's Party, the PPP. The PPP is a center-left political party allied with secularism, democratic socialism, modernization, and women's rights. In 2007, Benazir Bhutto tried to run for office yet again, but was assassinated by members of Al-Qaeda. What follows is an unpublished speech that Benazir Bhutto wrote in April of 1985, entitled Politics and the Muslim Woman. I think one of the first things that we must appreciate about the religion of Islam is that there's no one interpretation to it. Islam has certain religious aspects and has some aspects that relate to relations between man and society. Just as we have different sects in Islam upholding different religious views, whether it's the Shi'is, the Sunnis, the Malikis, the Hanafis, or the Bahravis, so too we have different interpretations with regard to the more specific aspects of the duties incumbent upon the Muslim. I would describe Islam in two main categories: reactionary Islam and progressive Islam. We have a reactionary interpretation of Islam which tries to uphold the status quo. Or we can have a progressive interpretation of Islam which tries to move with a changing world, which believes in human dignity, which believes in consensus, and which believes in giving women their due right. I know that some authors have speculated that women in Islamic countries can never achieve self-actualization or a degree of assertiveness unless they look at this from a non-Islamic point of view. I don't agree with this at all. I believe that Islam provides justice and equality for women, and I think that those aspects of Islam which have been highlighted by the mullahs do not do a service to our religion. When I use the term mullahs, please don't think of them in the same terms as the clergy. Christianity has a clergy. Islam does not have a clergy. The relationship between a Muslim and God is direct. There's no need for somebody to intervene. The mullahs try to intervene. The mullahs give their own interpretation. But I think there are growing movements as more and more people in Muslim countries, both men and women, achieve education and begin to examine the Quran in the light of their education. They are beginning not to agree with the mullahs on their orthodox or reactionary version of Islam. Let's start with the story of the fall. Unlike Christianity, it's not Eve who tempts Adam into tasting the apple and being responsible for original sin. According to Islam, and I mention this because I believe that Islam is an egalitarian religion, both Adam and Eve are tempted. Both are warned. Both do not heed the warning, and therefore the fall occurs. As far as opportunity is concerned, in Islam there is equal opportunity for both men and women. I refer to Surah Yasin, which says, "We produce orchids and date gardens and vines, and we cause springs to gush forth, that they may enjoy the fruits of it." God doesn't give fruits, orchids, or the fruit of the soil just for men to enjoy or for men to plow. He gives it to both men and women. What in terms of income and opportunity is available to both man and woman. The Surah of the women says, "To men is allotted what they earn, and to women what they earn." As regards the law of inheritance, some scholars make a great degree of the fact that inheritance law gives twice the amount to a son and half the amount to a daughter. Well, maybe if you look at it in isolation, but not if you look at the whole aspect, because it's made abundantly clear that the woman's share is for the use of the woman alone. The man gets 2/3. 1/3, the equivalent of a woman's, is for his own use. The additional 1/3 that a man gets is to provide provision for his wife and children. This is the obligation on the man. He gets that extra share so that he can provide for the family, his wife and children. The wife is not responsible for the welfare of the husband, nor is she responsible for the welfare of the children. The wife is not even responsible for suckling her own child. If she chooses not to suckle her child, she doesn't have to. And if she chooses to suckle her child, it's for the husband to provide her with the provisions. But when it's the case of, for instance, of parents, then the Quran says, for parents, a 1/6 share of the inheritance to each if the deceased left children. It does not say that the father must get double and the woman must get half. It goes on again to make an equal application when it says, if the man or woman who has left neither ascendants nor descendants, but has left a brother or a sister, each one of the two gets a 1/6. If more than 2 brothers and sisters, they shall share 1/3 of the estate after payment of legacies and debts. On the whole, the Quran proves that it has a balanced outlook, whether it refers to men or women. As far as forgiveness and reward are concerned, similar conditions are set down for both men and for women. I refer to the Surah of the Clan. Men who surrender unto God, and women who surrender, and men who believe, and women who believe, and men who speak the truth, and women who speak the truth, and men who persevere in righteousness, and women who persevere, and men who are humble, and women who are humble, in men who give alms and women who give alms, and men who fast and women who fast, and men who guard their modesty and women who guard their modesty, and men who remember God much and women who remember. God has prepared for them forgiveness and a vast reward. There are no special considerations set out for the male sex to show that in the eyes of God they're deserving of special considerations. In the Surah of Repentance, again, emphasis is laid on equal advice to men and women. The believing man and the believing woman, all loyalty is to one another. They enjoin noble deeds and forbid dishonor. They perform prayer and say the alms and obey God and his messenger. On them will God have mercy. If it's a matter of entering paradise, then again the Surah of Luqman says, "If any do righteousness, be they male or female, and have faith, they will enter paradise." As regards theft, if you look at the Surah of the table spread, as for the thief, both male and female cut off their hand. Now, this doesn't have to do with Muslim women, but I'd like to add at this juncture that within Islam there are two kinds of interpretation. One is the rigid interpretation, and one is the conceptual interpretation. Thus, in the rigid or mullahistic sense, cut off their hand would mean cut off their hand even today. But in the conceptual analysis of Islam, cut off their hand would mean adapt those practices which prevent thievery occurring again. And again, these means may change with the advance of society. It may involve psychiatric help. It may involve having them kept in a separate home. But the main idea is that whether you look at it rigidly, cut off their hand, or whether you look at it conceptually, do not provide the means for them to do that theft again. When it's adultery, again, the adulterer and adulteress give them 100 stripes. That is the Surah of the Light. Again, I would like to say that there is a rigid interpretation and the conceptual interpretation. And I think that most progressive Muslims believe in the conceptual interpretation because they believe Islam is a dynamic religion for all times and ages. In behavior towards parents, in the Surah of the Israelites, it says, "Be kind to parents, and out of kindness lower to them the wing of humility and say, 'My Lord, bestow on them your mercy, even as they cherished me in childhood.'" The reference is to both men and women. And that is the predominant theme of the Quran. The references are to men and women. The references are not to men as being characteristic of certain qualities and separate qualities for women. It's not a reference to the male sex as being endowed with some superior attribute and to the woman as being endowed with inferior attributes. The attributes are the same. Both are the creatures of God. Both have certain rights. Both have certain duties. Both have certain obligations. If they want to go to heaven, they have to behave in a special manner. If they want to do good on this earth, they have to give alms to the needy. They have to help orphans. The behavior is acceptable to both men and women. It's not religion which makes the difference. The difference comes from man-made law. It comes from the fact that soon after the Prophet died, it was not the Islam of the Prophet that remained. What took place was the emergence or the reassertiveness of the patriarchal society, and religion was taken over to justify the norms of the tribal society, rather than the point that the Prophet had been trying to make in replacing the tribal society with a religion that aimed to cut across narrow loyalties and sought to create a new community or ummah on the basis of Islam and the message of God. Now, there are certain interpretations with the Holy Quran which are extremely ambiguous. Some people interpret them in favor of the conservatives. Some people interpret them in favor of the reactionaries. One of these occurs in the Surah of the Romans. He created from you helpmates, from yourself, that you might find rest in them. This is an interpretation that progressives will give. Because it says he created from you, it does not say he created from men. He created from you means he created from mankind, or the human race, helpmates. But then other interpretations are given which claim what it says is, God created out of you, out of man, mates that you might find rest in them. And the conservatives use this to say that women were created for men to find rest. Or rather, that they were created to be in the service of man rather than being equal to man. Arabic is a very complex language. It's a language that many Muslims don't even understand, because Islam is not only in Arab countries, but has spread far and beyond. These scholars and these mullahs usually argue on these points. One mullah will say that God created woman for rest, and therefore women are to be used by men. Another one will say no, he created them from amongst yourself. So it depends very much on a matter of interpretation. But which way should interpretation go? Should it go against the basic grain of the entire message of the religion? Or should it be in consonance with the basic message of that religion? When the basic message of Islam was for justice and for equality, when it came as a religion to liberate mankind from superstition and ignorance, to provide education and improvements, then I think it's quite clear for modern Muslim thinkers that it's a religion which did not provide for discrimination and ought to be interpreted in the light of its main thematic message, that rather than to make ambiguous statements go against the basic theme of that message. There are many other aspects of Islam which are taken up, again, to provide controversy on whether men and women are equal or not. One of these is the law of evidence. Now, the law of evidence, in one specific part of the Quran, it is said that if you're going to take a loan or a debt, 2 men are needed, or 4 women. Now, this 2 men are needed, or 4 women, has been changed by certain societies, including Pakistan under the present military ruler, to mean that the worth of a woman is half that of a man, and that if a woman is killed, compensation will be paid that is half that of a man's. And if in a court of law there is evidence, then the woman's evidence will be worth half that of a man. There's no justification for this whatsoever, because if the evidence of a woman is worth half that of a man, it would have been clearly stated in the Quran. It would not have been related to debts or loans. It would have been stated in matters pertaining to legal affairs. The evidence of a woman will be half that of a man. Or it would have said that in the matter of murder, the compensation will be half that of a man's. Instead, in terms of compensation, the Holy Quran goes on to say that if you can have retributions, a slave for a slave, a free man for a free man, a woman for a woman, or if the parties agree, they can come to an agreement on blood money, or they can set a slave free. Now the Quran says, set a slave free. It doesn't say if a woman is murdered, set half a slave free. The Quran itself makes no distinction at all. It is man and the mullahs who claim to be the clergy of Islam, and no clergy exists in Islam. It is they who make these discriminations and who give the wrong impression of our religion, not only to the outside world, but to Muslims ourselves. The law of evidence, which some Muslim countries following reactionary paths have adopted, conveniently forgets that the first witness to Islam was a woman, and that was the Prophet's wife, Khadijah. The only witness to the martyrdom of the third Caliph, Uthman, was his wife, Nila. So, when women themselves had been accepted in early Islam as sole witnesses, then what right do these people have, who come much later, to declare that women are worth only half a man's evidence, and that if they're killed, their compensation should be half? The other aspect that is pointed out in which women are discriminated against is on the question of inheritance, which I've already dealt with, so I don't think I'm going to say any more on that. The third is the right of divorce and polygamy. It's often said that Islam provides for 4 wives for a man. But in my interpretation of this, and in the interpretation of many other Muslims, that is simply not true. What the Quran does say, and I quote, "Marry as many women as you wish, wives 2 or 3 or 4. If you fear not to treat them equally, marry only one. I doubt you will be able to be just between your wives even if you try." So if God himself and his message says that he doubts that you can be equal, I don't know how any man can turn around and say that God has given me the right to get married more than once. The Prophet Muhammad, throughout the life of his first wife Khadijah, never married again. The Prophet's son-in-law, who was more or less like an adopted son, Hadrat Ali, during the lifetime of his first wife, Bibi Fatima, never married more than once. The marriages that were later were more out of necessity or of warfare, widows, or of tribal connections. Thus, to say that a man could be allowed to marry 4 times at will is not something that you can find a strong argument for in the Quran. And if you look at Muslim society, it's not that often that the vast Muslim population goes on marrying 2, 3, or 4 wives. It's something that is related just to the privileged class. They can afford to do that. And they didn't. As the Caliphate ruled and the Muslim Empire ruled, they didn't just marry 2, 3, or 4 women. They went on to keep harems with hundreds of concubines. None of that had anything to do with Islam either. A woman in Islam, when she marries, does not take her husband's name. That is, again, something that has come about more as a matter of exposure to other customs or traditions. A woman in Islam is an identity in her own right. She is not an extension first of her father and then an extension of her husband. She asserts herself from the moment she is born. She is a person with the characteristics she develops, and she keeps her own name. The ideal of identity is just being appreciated in the West, where many people are beginning to keep their own name. Aside from these provisions from the Holy Quran, which I've been drawing your attention to, I would like to say that within Islamic history, there have been very strong roles for women. For instance, the Prophet's wife, Bibi Khadijah, was a woman of independent means. She had her own business. She traded. She dealt with society at large. She employed the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when he was a young boy, and subsequently, Bibi Khadijah herself sent a proposal of marriage to the Prophet. So she was the very image of someone who was independent, assertive, and does not conform to the passive description of women in Muslim societies that we have grown accustomed to hearing about. Bibi Khadijah was 15 years older than the Prophet, and she was also known not only as the wife of the Prophet, but as the mother of all believers. Bibi Khadijah is a symbol, one can say, of all the sects of Islam. Within the 2 major sects of Shiism and Sunnism, both sects provide for other powerful role models for women. The Shiite sect provides for Bibi Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet, who from a very small age saw the humiliation that her father faced in spreading his message. When he was taunted, when things were thrown at him, it was Bibi Fatima who was by his side. When they had to face confinement and exile, she, along with her mother, was with him. Hers is a figure of endurance. It's not only a figure of endurance, but after the death of the Prophet, hers is also a figure fighting physically for what she considers to be a usurped right. A usurpation in terms of the caliphate going to Abu Bakr instead of to Hadrat Ali, and also usurpation in what she considers to be her property seized unlawfully by the caliphate. So she is a woman who does not accept what has happened to her after the death of the Prophet. She goes on to the helpers, She speaks of them in her plight, and she adopts a political role until her death. Within the Sunni version, there is Bibi Aisha, who is also put forward as a politically astute woman, who, after the death of the Prophet, was responsible for many of the traditions, hadith, that have been handed down to us, who was the one who proposed the caliphate of Hadrat Uthman, and held out the shirt of the Prophet Muhammad and said that, even before this shirt has decayed, you'll have to ordain someone like Hadrat Uthman. She made her views known. She was an extremely bold person. Not only did she make her views known, when she opposed something, she went to the battlefield and fought against it. So when we have such powerful role models for women, of the mother, Bibi Khadija, of the daughter, Bibi Fatima, and of the wife, Bibi Aisha, then one must ask, why is it that today in Muslim countries, one doesn't see that much of women? One doesn't hear that much of women? Why is it that women are secluded? Why is it that women are subject to social control? Why is it that women are not given their due share of property? It has nothing to do with religion, but it's got very much to do with material or man-made considerations. I've tried to show you Islam as being a very liberal religion towards women, as giving women their own identity, giving women the right to choose their husbands. If they're not happy with their spouse, they don't have to keep him. When the divorce law, the nuptial agreement between a man and a woman, is written, it is a contract of how you can live together. You can write in that contract that I want to divorce you. You can write in that contract, in the event of divorce, I want to be maintained according to the style that I'm accustomed to. All these considerations are there, and yet women are backward, and they're backward not because Islam has made them backward, but because societies that they live in are societies which have upheld the privileged class and which have subsisted on a policy of discrimination against a wide segment of the population. Before I conclude on this aspect of the powerful role within Islam of women, I would like to quote from the Quran, the Surah of the Ant. I found a woman ruling over them, and she has been given abundance of all things, and hers is a mighty throne. It is not Islam which is averse to women rulers, I think. It is men. Benazir Bhutto begins her speech with a critique of the mullahs. What is her critique? How does she define Islam differently than them? What are some issues in the Quran which are used to explain the inferiority and subjugation of women? How does Benazir Bhutto respond to these claims? Who are some Muslims Benazir Bhutto offers as examples of independent women in the early Ummah?